Die young. Actress Dana Plato, who played Coleman's sister on the show, died at just 34 of an overdose. In her final interview, which was with Inside Edition, Plato told us she was sober.
Fame promised her everything: adoration, fortune, immortality. But behind the camera lights, Dana Plato's life spiraled into a nightmare of scandal, heartbreak, and devastating choices. Once America's beloved teen idol, she became a cautionary tale of Hollywood's darkest side.
Dana Plato was born in Maywood, California on November 7, 1964. At this time, her name was Dana Michelle Strain. Her mother, Linda Strain, was an unmarried 16-year-old who already had an 18-month-old child.
Dana Michelle Strain, later known to the world as Dana Plato, entered life on November 7, 1964, in Maywood, California. Her story, as many child stars' stories do, began not in glamour, but in uncertainty. Her biological mother was just a teenager when Dana was born. At only 7 months old, Dana was placed for adoption. That decision would change the course of her life forever. She was taken in by Dean and Kay Plato, a couple living in the San Fernando Valley. From the start, Dana's childhood was shaped by forces far beyond her control. When Dana was only 3 years old, her adoptive parents divorced. After that, she was raised mostly by her mother, Kay, who took on a role that was part parent, part manager, and some would argue, part stage mother. Kay was determined to push her daughter into show business. The San Fernando Valley in the 1970s was an active hub for aspiring actors, and Kay saw her daughter as a natural candidate for stardom. Dana was small, wide-eyed, and expressive. Very quickly, she was going on auditions. By the time she was a child, Dana had already appeared in dozens of commercials. Reports suggest that number climbed into the hundreds as she grew older. These included advertisements for popular brands of the era, giving her a level of exposure most children never experience. But for Kay, it wasn't enough. She wanted her daughter to break into film and television. That pressure to achieve more would become a constant theme in Dana's life. At the age of 13, Dana managed to land her first significant film roles. She appeared in Exorcist II, The Heretic, and Return to Boggy Creek, both released in 1977. Unfortunately for Dana, neither film performed well. Exorcist II, in particular, is still remembered as one of the worst reviewed sequels of all time. Her other project, a low-budget horror sequel, barely made an impression. Yet these experiences gave her early exposure to the film industry and its highs and lows. Later that same year, she also appeared in California Suite, a star-studded Neil Simon adaptation featuring established names like Jane Fonda and Richard Pryor. This was a step up and provided Dana with the first hint of what it might feel like to be part of a more serious Hollywood production. Still, the role was minor, and it did not yet make her a household name. It was a twist of fate that put Dana on the path to the role that would define her. While auditioning with a cheerleading group for The Gong Show, a quirky variety show popular at the time, she caught the attention of television producers. They were casting for a new sitcom, and Dana was invited to audition. That sitcom would become Different Strokes, and for Dana, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. At this point, Dana faced a major decision. Alongside her acting pursuits, she was an accomplished figure skater. She had trained seriously and was even considered for a potential spot on the United States Olympic team. For a teenager, it was a choice most people could hardly imagine. Should she pursue the disciplined life of an athlete or gamble on acting? Dana chose acting. In hindsight, this decision would alter not only her career, but her entire life trajectory. In 1978, NBC launched Different Strokes. The show's premise was bold for the time. A wealthy white businessman living in Manhattan adopts two African-American boys from Harlem. The series touched on themes of race, class, and family dynamics, but it was packaged in the format of a lighthearted sitcom. Dana was cast as Kimberly Drummond, the sweet and caring teenage daughter of Philip Drummond, played by Conrad Bain. Her on-screen brothers were Arnold, portrayed by Gary Coleman, and Willis, played by Todd Bridges. The chemistry between the young cast was immediate. Coleman, with his comedic timing and catchphrase, "What you talking about, Willis?" became the breakout star. But Dana's role as Kimberly was equally important. She was the voice of compassion and balance within the Drummond household, often playing the mediator in the family's conflicts. Almost overnight, Dana Plato became a familiar face in American households. With that fame came the challenges of sudden celebrity. Dana was only 14 when she began on Different Strokes. She went from being a relatively anonymous child actor to being recognized across the country. Fans adored her, but the pressures of being in the public eye were immense. There was little space for privacy or mistakes, and those pressures were amplified by her age. Off-screen, Dana developed a close relationship with her co-stars Gary Coleman and Todd Bridges. All three were young and navigating an adult-dominated world of producers, managers, and network executives. They leaned on each other for support, but they also, according to later reports, developed unhealthy coping mechanisms together. Like many young stars, they were introduced early to alcohol and drugs. What began as experimentation would later become full-blown struggles. At home, things were no less complicated. Dana's mother, Kay, remained heavily involved in her career. While Kay was protective to a degree, she was also deeply invested in her daughter's success. Reports suggest she worried about Dana being kidnapped, a fear not uncommon among parents of young stars. At the same time, Dana's father, Dean, who had not been particularly active in her upbringing, resurfaced when Dana became famous. He even went as far as to sue her for financial support, a lawsuit that did not succeed but left emotional scars. By the early 1980s, Different Strokes was a cultural phenomenon. Dana was in her late teens, navigating fame while also beginning to assert her independence. At 18, she married rock guitarist Lanny Lambert. The marriage was considered impulsive, but it reflected Dana's desire to establish her own adult identity outside the confines of being Kimberly Drummond. Not long after, she became pregnant with their son, Tyler. Her pregnancy created tensions with the producers of Different Strokes. The network had carefully built the show around its family-friendly image. Having one of its young stars visibly pregnant did not align with the picture they wanted to project. At the same time, tabloids were beginning to report on Dana's off-screen behavior, including rumors of drug and alcohol use. For the producers, this was too much to manage. In 1984, they made the decision to write her character out of the show. By the mid-1980s, Dana Plato's life was already showing signs of unraveling. After her exit from Different Strokes, she was thrust into a world where her fame was both an asset and a burden. While she had become a household name as Kimberly Drummond, she struggled to move beyond that image. Hollywood is notorious for typecasting, and once she had been branded as the sweet older sister on a family sitcom, few casting directors were willing to take a chance on her as a serious adult actress. This created a vacuum in her career, just as her personal life began to fall apart. In 1988, Dana faced a devastating double blow. Within the span of 1 week, her marriage to Lanny Lambert collapsed, and her mother, Kay, died from a rare illness. For someone who had always relied on her mother's guidance, however strict or controlling it may have been, the loss was overwhelming. On top of that, losing her marriage meant losing her partner and father of her son, Tyler. At just 24 years old, Dana was suddenly without the stability of a family and without the secure job that had sustained her for most of her teenage years. Financial struggles soon followed. With little acting work available, Dana turned to an accountant to help her manage what remained of her money. In a decision that would haunt her, she signed over power of attorney. Instead of managing her finances responsibly, the accountant embezzled nearly everything she had. According to reports, he stole millions not only from her but from other clients as well. By the time Dana realized what had happened, she was left with only a fraction of her earnings, less than $150,000. The timing could not have been worse. With mounting expenses, a failed marriage, and a growing dependence on drugs and alcohol, Dana found herself in freefall. Her ex-husband was awarded custody of their son Tyler during divorce proceedings. For Dana, losing her child was perhaps the most painful loss of all. She had been stripped of her career, her financial stability, her mother, her husband, and now her son. In the years that followed, Dana attempted to rebuild her image and carve out a new career path. One of her earliest attempts came in 1989, when she posed for Playboy magazine. She hoped that the spread would help reintroduce her as an adult actress and shed the wholesome Kimberly Drummond persona. The move generated headlines, but it did not lead to the acting opportunities she had hoped for. Her attempts to reinvent herself continued in low-budget films. She appeared in projects such as Prime Suspect and Bikini Beach Race, where she took on more provocative roles in an effort to separate herself from her child star past. Unfortunately, these films did little to restore her credibility in Hollywood. Instead, they highlighted how far she had fallen from the heights of her sitcom success. By the early 1990s, Dana's personal troubles began to overshadow her professional life entirely. In 1991, she made headlines for all the wrong reasons when she walked into a Las Vegas video store armed with a pellet gun and attempted to rob the cashier. The amount of money she took was just $164, but the incident quickly became national news. The store clerk immediately recognized her and, during the 911 call, famously told the dispatcher, "I've just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Different Strokes." The bizarre crime shocked the public. Many saw it as a desperate cry for help rather than a serious attempt at armed robbery. Dana herself returned to the store soon after, claiming she had dropped her glasses and even attempted to return the money. Nevertheless, she was arrested. For a time, she sat alone in a jail cell, with no family or friends stepping forward to bail her out. Unexpectedly, her savior came in the form of entertainer Wayne Newton, often referred to as Mr. Las Vegas. Newton had never met Dana, but he was moved by her plight and paid the $13,000 needed for her bail. In court, the judge appeared sympathetic, recognizing her struggles with addiction and mental health. Instead of a harsh sentence, Dana was given 5 years probation. The incident sparked a wider conversation in the media about the pressures of child stardom. Dana's former co-stars, Gary Coleman and Todd Bridges, were themselves dealing with highly publicized struggles. To the public, it appeared that the cast of Different Strokes had become yet another cautionary tale about the dangers of early fame. In 1992, Dana faced further legal troubles. She was arrested for forging a prescription for Valium, an anti-anxiety drug. Unlike the video store robbery, the court was less lenient this time. Because she had violated her probation, she was sentenced to 30 days in jail. After serving her time, she enrolled in a drug rehabilitation program in an effort to regain control of her life. Despite these efforts, her career continued to falter. Throughout the 1990s, she struggled to find steady work. She briefly took a job at a dry cleaner's, which became another humiliating reminder of how far she had fallen. Customers who recognized her would often remark on how strange it was to see a former television star handling their clothes. Some reported that Dana was kind and humble, but the reality remained that she was a once famous actress working minimum wage to survive. Her attempts to return to acting often came through unconventional projects. In 1992, she starred in the video game Night Trap, which became one of the first titles to spark controversy in the United States Congress over its content. The game featured her as part of a group of women being watched through surveillance cameras, and although tame by today's standards, it was labeled inappropriate at the time. The controversy did little to boost her career. By the mid-1990s, Dana's desperation became even more apparent. In 1997, she appeared in an adult film titled Different Strokes, a story of Jack and Jill. The title was a deliberate play on her old sitcom, and the role was seen as an attempt to profit off the notoriety of her past. It was another low point, signaling just how limited her options had become. During this period, she relied heavily on her manager, Robert Minai, who eventually became her fiancé. The two lived together in Florida, reportedly in poor conditions, including a rundown motorhome. It was a far cry from the life of wealth and fame she had once known. In 1998, Dana appeared in a film called Desperation Boulevard, where she played herself in a fictionalized story about a child star trying to make a comeback. The role was an eerie reflection of her own life, and in many ways served as a final attempt to win back the audience's sympathy. Unfortunately, the film did little to change her circumstances. By the late 1990s, Dana Plato was living on the margins of the entertainment world. Once celebrated as Kimberly Drummond on one of America's most popular sitcoms, she now survived through low-paying jobs, occasional film roles, and appearances that were more about notoriety than genuine acting. Years of substance abuse, financial instability, and failed attempts at career reinvention had taken their toll. Yet she still harbored hope for a comeback, some opportunity to prove to audiences and herself that she was more than the punchline of a tabloid headline. That chance, she thought, might come through public exposure, interviews, and the possibility of reshaping her narrative. One of the highest-profile platforms of the time was The Howard Stern Show, a radio program infamous for its confrontational style. Stern was already well known for putting celebrities in uncomfortable positions, often mocking them or pushing them to reveal deeply personal details. For Dana, an appearance on the show was risky, but it was also an opportunity. She wanted to demonstrate that she had turned her life around, that she was sober, and that she was ready to rebuild. On May 7, 1999, Dana entered Stern's New York studio. She was 34 years old and had been living with her fiancé and manager, Robert Menchaca, in a motorhome. By then, she had little money, her career was in tatters, and her relationship with her teenage son Tyler was strained due to her past struggles. Yet she carried herself with the determination to show that she was in control. From the outset, the interview was tense. Stern asked questions that cut straight to the most painful aspects of her life: her drug use, her arrests, her failed career, and the humiliations she had endured. He even questioned whether she was being honest about her sobriety. Dana, trying to remain composed, insisted that she had been sober for almost a decade. She explained that she had been exercising, focusing on her health, and felt fantastic. But Stern's style was rarely forgiving. Rather than offering her a chance to tell her story in her own words, he often interrupted or pressed her further, creating an atmosphere that felt more like cross-examination than conversation. The pressure mounted when Stern invited callers to participate. This was a regular feature of his show, but in this case, it opened the floodgates for anonymous voices to hurl insults. Some callers accused Dana of lying, insisting she sounded high on air. Others dismissed her as a washed-up addict or a has-been. Dana tried to remain polite and apologetic, telling one particularly cruel caller she was sorry he felt that way. Yet the relentless criticism chipped away at her composure. At one point, Stern and his team suggested that Dana take a drug test live on the show to prove her sobriety. They offered both a urine test and a hair sample. Perhaps feeling cornered and desperate to silence the accusations, Dana agreed. She even allowed a producer to cut strands of her hair for testing. It was a moment that revealed both her vulnerability and her determination to be believed. Yet as soon as the microphones were turned off, she reportedly asked for the hair back, clearly worried about what the results might show. Stern later remarked to the press that this confirmed his suspicions, that she had not been telling the truth. Throughout the interview, Dana vacillated between trying to present herself as upbeat and being forced into defensive explanations. She denied rumors about her sexuality, about continuing drug use, and about being unstable. She also tried to highlight her son, saying he was the reason she would never consider suicide, claiming she was proud of being his mother. But the harsh tone of the show, combined with the taunts of the callers, left her visibly shaken. When the interview ended, Dana left the studio humiliated. What she had hoped would be a platform for redemption had turned into another moment of public ridicule. In the eyes of many listeners, her appearance confirmed the narrative that she was still struggling, and perhaps incapable of turning her life around. The next day, May 8, 1999, Dana and her fiancé traveled to Moore, Oklahoma, where they visited Robert Menchaca's mother. During the visit, Dana complained of feeling unwell. She took a painkiller for lingering dental pain and added a muscle relaxant. She told Robert she was going to lie down in their motorhome, which was parked outside. Later that night, Robert joined her, falling asleep by her side. When he awoke the next morning, he discovered that Dana was no longer breathing. Her body was cold, and attempts to revive her failed. She was just 34 years old. Initially, authorities believed her death was accidental. Early reports described it as an overdose brought on by a mixture of painkillers and muscle relaxants. But when the toxicology results were released, the conclusion changed. The medical examiner ruled her death a suicide, citing the levels of drugs in her system as far beyond what would be expected for minor pain relief. The news spread quickly. For many, it was the tragic but unsurprising end to a life that had been marked by instability since childhood. For others, the timing raised disturbing questions. Less than 24 hours earlier, Dana had been publicly humiliated on one of the most listened to radio programs in the country. The juxtaposition was impossible to ignore. Was her appearance on the Howard Stern show the final blow that pushed her into despair, or was it simply another chapter in a decline that had been ongoing for years? Stern himself addressed the controversy in the days that followed. He claimed that Dana had been dishonest on his program, that she was clearly not sober, and that her request to have her hair sample returned proved as much. Critics accused him of exploiting a vulnerable woman for entertainment value. Supporters argued that Dana's struggles predated her interview, and that Stern could not be held responsible for her decision to take her life. The debate became a lightning rod for larger questions about the ethics of celebrity culture, tabloid media, and the exploitation of troubled stars. For Dana's family, the tragedy was compounded by the absence of resources to give her a proper farewell. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. At the time of her death, her net worth was reported to be only around $1,000. She had once been a star, earning thousands per episode on a hit sitcom, yet she died with virtually nothing. Her son Tyler, just 14 years old, was left to grapple with the loss of his mother. The trauma would haunt him for the rest of his life. He pursued a career in music, but he struggled with the same issues of addiction that had plagued Dana. In 2010, at just 25 years old, he died by suicide, a tragic echo of his mother's fate. Dana's death highlighted the often predictable trajectory of child stars who find fame too young and without adequate support. Her story was not unique. Her co-stars Gary Coleman and Todd Bridges also faced their own well-documented struggles. But it was one of the most haunting. The combination of early success, personal instability, addiction, financial ruin, and relentless public scrutiny had created a storm that she could not escape. The Howard Stern interview remains one of the most infamous moments in radio history, not only because of the rawness of Dana's appearance, but also because of what happened immediately afterwards. For some, it is an uncomfortable reminder of how entertainment can dehumanize the vulnerable, reducing them to spectacle rather than treating them as people in need. For others, it is simply part of a longer story of self-destruction that no one could have stopped. In the years after Dana Plato's death, her story did not fade quietly. Instead, it became part of a wider conversation about the lives of child stars, the weight of sudden fame, and the recurring tragedies that seemed to follow the cast of Different Strokes. What had once been a show that brought joy to millions of viewers was increasingly remembered for the hardships endured by the very children who had made it popular. For Dana's family, the immediate aftermath of her passing was heavy with grief and confusion. Her fiancé, Robert Menchaca, who had discovered her body, maintained that she had not seemed suicidal before her death. He described her as tired, unwell, but still making plans for the future. The official ruling of suicide, however, painted a different picture, one of a woman overwhelmed by years of instability and humiliation. Her son, Tyler Lambert, was just 14 when he lost his mother. Friends and relatives recalled that the trauma of her death weighed on him deeply. Growing up without her and living with the knowledge of her struggles shaped his own path in painful ways. Tyler had musical ambitions and began pursuing a career as a rapper and singer, but he also battled the same demons that had plagued his mother. Addiction and depression followed him into early adulthood. In 2010, just days before Mother's Day, and more than a decade after Dana's death, Tyler died by suicide at the age of 25. The manner of his passing mirrored his mother's tragic end, reinforcing the idea that the cycle of despair in their family had never been broken. Dana's story also left behind unanswered questions about responsibility and exploitation. The Howard Stern interview continued to be revisited in the media, especially as Stern's own career and reputation evolved. Some listeners believed his relentless style of questioning and his decision to open the phone lines for harsh callers had contributed to Dana's fragile state in her final hours. Others argued that Dana's issues were long-standing and complex, and that it was too simplistic to blame a single interview. Stern himself insisted that she had not been truthful with him, and that her decision to ask for her hair sample back showed she was still hiding her drug use. Still, the link between her humiliation on the show and her death the following day remained deeply unsettling for many. But Dana was not the only member of the Diff'rent Strokes cast whose life took a tragic turn. Her co-star Gary Coleman, who had been the breakout star of the show, endured his own series of struggles in the years that followed its end. Coleman had been known for his catchphrase and comedic presence, but off-screen his life was far from lighthearted. As a child, he was diagnosed with a kidney condition that required frequent medical treatment, stunted his growth, and left him dependent on dialysis. Despite earning millions during his years on Diff'rent Strokes, Coleman later discovered that much of his fortune had been mismanaged. He sued his adoptive parents and former manager, eventually winning a settlement, but the financial losses were significant. Coleman's adult life was marked by instability, health problems, and turbulent personal relationships. In 2010, he died at the age of 42 from a brain hemorrhage following what was described as a fall in his Utah home. His death was ruled accidental, but controversy surrounded the circumstances. His ex-wife, Shannon Price, who was present at the time, gave inconsistent accounts of what had happened. Some of Coleman's friends and family openly questioned whether there was more to the story, pointing to the couple's history of volatile arguments and legal disputes. Although police ruled out foul play, suspicion lingered. A decade later, in documentaries and interviews, questions about Coleman's death resurfaced. Shannon Price even participated in a lie detector test for television, attempting to clear her name. The results were inconclusive, leaving public opinion divided. For many, Coleman's death became another sad chapter in the troubled legacy of the Diff'rent Strokes cast. The third member of the show's child trio, Todd Bridges, also struggled but managed to survive his difficulties and later rebuild his life. Bridges, who played Willis Jackson, was just 13 when he was cast in the series. Like Dana and Gary, he was suddenly thrust into the pressures of fame without much preparation. He began experimenting with drugs in his teens, which escalated into severe addiction in adulthood. His battles with cocaine and other substances led him into dangerous situations, including legal trouble. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Bridges faced multiple arrests, including charges of drug possession and even attempted murder. In 1989, he was accused of shooting a drug dealer during a dispute. Bridges claimed self-defense, and he was later acquitted, but the incident damaged his reputation. His downward spiral seemed to confirm the pattern many people associated with child stars: early fame, followed by addiction, crime, and public disgrace. Yet unlike Dana and Gary, Todd Bridges eventually turned his life around. He entered rehabilitation and began speaking openly about his struggles. He later revealed in his memoir that he had been the victim of sexual abuse as a child, an experience that deeply affected him and contributed to his drug use. By confronting those experiences publicly, Bridges sought to bring awareness to the hidden traumas faced by young actors in Hollywood. Over time, Bridges built a career as a survivor and advocate. He appeared in television interviews, wrote about his journey, and began working with others facing addiction. Though his career never returned to the heights of Diff'rent Strokes, he carved out a different kind of legacy, one defined by resilience rather than tragedy. His survival provided a rare glimmer of hope in a story otherwise dominated by loss. The collective experiences of Dana Plato, Gary Coleman, and Todd Bridges turned Different Strokes into a cultural case study. The show had once been a lighthearted sitcom tackling social issues through comedy. But in retrospect, it became synonymous with the darker side of child fame. Each of the young stars was subjected to pressures far greater than they could manage. The combination of sudden wealth, media scrutiny, family conflicts, and lack of emotional support proved devastating. Dana's death in particular became a cautionary tale. She was the archetype of a child actor who seemed to have everything, only to lose it all in a matter of years. Her decline from beloved sitcom star to struggling adult actress, her arrests, her financial ruin, and her final desperate attempt to prove herself on Howard Stern's show created a narrative that was both tragic and familiar. Hollywood had seen it before, and sadly, it would see it again with other young stars in the years to follow. Even today, Dana Plato's name is often mentioned in conversations about child actors and the dangers of early fame. Her story is revisited in documentaries, articles, and retrospectives on Different Strokes. For fans who remembered her as the kind and caring Kimberly Drummond, her downfall remains difficult to reconcile. For critics of the entertainment industry, her life represents the consequences of a system that profits from youth and innocence, but offers little protection when those qualities inevitably fade. Part 4 of Dana Plato's story is not only about her, but also about the legacy she left behind. It is about her son Tyler, whose life ended in heartbreak, echoing her own. It is about Gary Coleman, whose death left unresolved questions. And it is about Todd Bridges, who managed to emerge from the same environment, but only after years of hardship. Together, their stories show how the promise of fame can quickly transform into something destructive. Dana Plato's ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean, a quiet end for someone whose life had been lived so publicly. Yet her story continues to ripple outward, shaping how people view the lives of child actors and the responsibilities of the adults and industries around them. The tragedy is not just that she died young, but that her struggles were visible for years and yet never fully addressed. In the end, she became more than just a former sitcom star. She became a symbol of the fragility of fame, the costs of exploitation, and the human toll behind the headlines.